The crystal chandelier above the Charleston Gala didn't glitter. It vibrated softly, resonating with the weight of old money and even older secrets. My mother-in-law, Sarah, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her silk gown whispering against the floor like a prelude to something unpleasant. She lifted her glass, the wine catching the light as her eyes moved past me, past my husband, and came to rest deliberately on the biological cousins. "To the legacy," she declared, her tones sweet as honey but reinforced with iron. "To the true bloodline that keeps this family estate alive." One by one, she distributed small, weighty boxes, $1 200 designer watches for Hannah and Ryan. Applause fluttered politely around the room. Then her gaze shifted to my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. My heart didn't race, it calculated. Sarah bent beneath the table and produced a crinkled plastic bag. From it she withdrew a thrift store teddy bear, its ear torn, its ribbon bleached by time. "And a little something for our guest," she murmured. Behind her, the projector flickered on, illuminating the ancestral family tree across the far wall. I searched instinctively for Emma's name. The branch where it should have appeared was empty, a clean, deliberate void where my daughter had been surgically erased from the lineage of the house. Have you ever been treated like a guest in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I'm reading every story. I did not blink. I did not pull Emma into my arms or shield her from the screen. I wanted her to see clearly. I wanted her to understand exactly who these people were before I permanently excised them from her life. Sarah's smile remained fixed, that thin, poisoned curve of satisfaction, as the guests leaned toward one another in whispers. She believed she had executed a masterstroke. She thought a $10 bear was a checkmate. It was the opening bell. Anger did not blur my focus, it honed it. In museum curation, when a painting is exposed as counterfeit, you don't weep over it, you remove it from display. I rose slowly, my heels striking the marble floor with the precision of a countdown. I walked to the gift table where 2 cream envelopes rested, trust fund disbursements of $2,500 each, earmarked for the true heirs. I picked them up. Sarah's smile flickered. "Jennifer, what are you?" I offered no reply. I turned toward the 3-tiered industrial chocolate fountain, its dark cascade flowing in steady, glossy ribbons. With the steady hands of someone accustomed to handling fragile antiquities, I held the envelopes above the molten stream. Then I released them. The paper struck the chocolate and disappeared instantly into the thick, warm current. Silence didn't settle gently, it detonated. "Since Emma is a guest," I said, my voice cool and carrying to the back of the hall, "then my husband's salary, the salary that funded this catering, this venue. And the very chocolate swallowing those envelopes is guest money as well. And I'm collecting the interest." Beside me, Christopher did not hesitate. He did not defend his mother. He slid his phone from his tuxedo pocket and entered a sequence he had clearly prepared in advance. "I just revoked family authorization on the Charleston estate accounts. Mother," he said, his tone flat as a legal brief. "Staff payroll, security contracts, utilities for your legacy home, they're suspended. Since we're not family, I'm confident your true bloodline can manage the expenses by morning." We did not linger for her reaction. I took Emma's hand, leaving the thrift store bare face down on the white linen. We walked out of the gala, my heels echoing through a hall full of people who had just realized they were standing inside a building they could no longer afford. I did not look back as we crossed the estate threshold, abandoning the suffocating blend of lilies and expensive perfume. The humid Charleston night wrapped around us, but what I felt was colder, a surgical clarity that comes when you finally stop trying to repair a malfunctioning machine and decide to salvage it instead. For 6 years, I had been the unseen engineer of Sarah's social standing. While she played matriarch, I operated quietly behind the curtain. I curated her private art acquisitions to ensure they outperformed inflation. I handled the estate's historic tax strategies. When a burst pipe threatened the East Wing and jeopardized the family's foundation grants, I poured a substantial portion of my inheritance into its restoration. I had been the silent investor in an enterprise called Family, and I had just realized I carried 100% of the liability with 0% ownership. Emma's hand rested small and still in mine. She was too quiet. She hadn't asked why her cousins received watches while she received refuse. She hadn't asked why her name was absent from the screen. Children are precise instruments for measuring toxicity. We think silence protects them. In truth, it conditions them to mistake mistreatment for love. I had normalized it. I told myself that if I tried harder, if I perfected every holiday, ignored every subtle remark about Emma's non-biological status, eventually the distance would narrow. I believed love was a bridge I could construct alone, but you cannot build toward a cliff that keeps moving away. When Sarah looked at Emma, she did not see a granddaughter. She saw a line item to be erased, a guest reducing the inheritance of her real heirs. At the car, Christopher opened Emma's door. His jaw was set in the rigid line I typically saw in court. He wasn't a wounded son anymore. He was an attorney recognizing a breach so severe it required total liquidation. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm more than okay," I replied, glancing at my phone. The family group texts were already igniting outrage, confusion, demands. I've spent 6 years polishing Sarah's image. I think it's time the world sees the corrosion underneath. The morning after the gala did not deliver regret, it delivered strategy. By 8:00 a.m., Sarah had launched a scorched earth campaign. The family chat had become a digital obituary for my reputation. She posted a rambling manifesto on Facebook about entitlement, instability, and how Christopher was being manipulated by a woman who failed to respect the sanctity of the Charleston name. I watched the notifications roll in as I sipped my coffee. I offered no defense. In my profession, you do not debate a counterfeit. You catalog its flaws until its value collapses. "She's threatening a defamation suit," Christopher said as he entered the kitchen. He wasn't in a robe. He wore a charcoal suit, briefcase open on the island. He looked less like a son and more like opposing counsel, spotting a weakness in discovery. "She wants the watches returned and a public apology for the trauma inflicted on the cousins." "Let her threaten," I said, sliding a folder across the marble. While she was drafting her Facebook essay, I was reviewing the provenance of the ancestral emerald necklace she wore last night. Years of studying master brushstrokes and pigment composition had taught me how to identify fraud. Sarah's emerald piece, supposedly in the family since 1890, featured a setting design that didn't exist before 1980. "Christopher," I continued evenly, "your mother has marketed herself as the guardian of pure history, but the history she's presenting is fabricated. She hasn't merely been cruel, she's been altering records to conceal something. I want a full forensic audit of every trust she oversees, especially Emma's." The conflict shifted in that moment. This was no longer about a teddy bear or a toast. It was about the adoption paradox. Sarah weaponized bloodline to exclude Emma emotionally. Yet she had no problem leveraging resources connected to Emma's father to benefit her biological grandchildren. To Sarah, Emma was not family when it came to love, but she was entirely family when capital was involved. It was parasitism disguised as tradition. "I've already filed notice of breach of fiduciary duty," Christopher said, his voice dropping. "I'm not operating as a son anymore. I'm operating like the IRS. I've initiated a 10-year audit of the Charleston estate's operating expenses. If she skimmed, I'll find the decimal where she slipped." The audit didn't merely open a door, it blew apart the vault. Christopher and I sat in his office, 3 monitors casting blue light across his glasses. The spreadsheet on screen told a story far darker than favoritism. "Jennifer, look at this entry from 3 years ago," he said, his voice calm in that unnerving pre-cross-examination tone. "The legacy trust she claims is funded by generations of Charleston ancestors. It's hollow." I leaned forward, curator instincts recognizing the anomaly instantly. Every 6 months, like clockwork, $40,000 appeared. Predictable, mechanical. I traced the transfer source. It wasn't ancestral farmland. It wasn't a blue-chip portfolio. It was a dormant account under Emma's biological father's name, a secondary life insurance trust Christopher had been told had been depleted by administrative erosion years ago. The realization struck with physical force. Sarah hadn't just been mean to Emma, she had been harvesting her. She used Emma's status as a non-relative to justify treating her like a servant, while simultaneously using Emma's actual inheritance to pay for the designer watches, the cousins' private schools, and the very champagne she had used to toast her true bloodline at the gala. It was the ultimate irony. The pure family was being kept on life support by the very child they claimed didn't belong. "She's been skimming," I whispered. She's been stealing from a 7-year-old to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her own. It's not just skimming, Christopher replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up a digitized record from a high-end auction house. Look at the emerald necklace. I found the sale record. Sarah sold the original family heirloom 6 years ago, right after we adopted Emma. She replaced it with a lab-grown synthetic and pocketed the difference. She's been liquidating the family history to keep up appearances, and she used Emma's trust to cover the insurance premiums on the fakes. In the world of art, a forgery is a crime against history. In a family, this was a crime against the future. Sarah had spent years gaslighting us, making us feel like we were lucky to be included in her prestigious world, while she was effectively picking our daughter's pockets under the table. Christopher, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the synthetic stone Sarah wore, we aren't going to just sue her, we're going to dismantle her. We're going to take back every cent, every brick of that estate, and every bit of dignity she stole from Emma. I've already drafted the criminal referral, Christopher said, hitting the print command. The printer began to hum, churning out the pages that would end Sarah's reign. This isn't family drama anymore. This is a crime scene. The brunch at the estate was supposed to be Sarah's victory lap, a chance to regroup and pressure Christopher into dropping the audit. She sat at the head of the table, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a silver teapot, the synthetic emeralds on her neck catching the morning sun. She looked smaller today, the weight of the professional shift finally pressing down on her. Christopher, darling, she started, her voice thin. Family matters should stay within these walls. This audit, it's embarrassing. Think of the legacy. Think of what people will say. Christopher didn't look up from his coffee. I am thinking of the legacy, Mother. I'm thinking about how much of it was stolen, I signaled Emma. She walked forward, carrying the weathered wooden box we had found in the back of the estate's climate-controlled storage, the one Sarah thought I'd never audited. Emma placed it on the table directly in front of Sarah. Grandma, Emma said, her voice clear and devoid of the fear Sarah had spent years trying to instill in her. Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen. She opened the lid with a shaky hand. Inside wasn't a child's drawing. It was a stack of certified bank statements and the original auction house receipt for the real emerald she had sold 6 years ago. Attached to the top was a criminal referral for felony embezzlement and wire fraud. You used my daughter as an ATM, I said, my voice cutting through the clinking of silverware like a razor. You erased her name from the family tree while you were busy draining her father's trust to pay for your fake life. You didn't just exclude her, you robbed her. Sarah looked at the cousins, then at Christopher. I did it for the family name. I had to keep the estate running. Christopher, please, we're losing everything. Do something for your sister, for the history of this house. The woman who had treated us like guests was now a beggar in her own dining room. Christopher stood up, sliding a final folder across the table. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a 24-hour notice to vacate. I already did something for the family, Christopher said. His tone lethal and final. I protected the only member of it who actually matters. This house was bought with funds stolen from Emma's trust. Legally, it belongs to her now. And as her trustee, I'm terminating your residency. You can't do this, Sarah whispered, a single tear of desperation rolling down her cheek. I have nowhere to go. I'm sure the true bloodline will take you in, I said, standing up and taking Emma's hand. After all, blood is thicker than water, right? Let's see if it's thick enough to pay for a hotel. We walked out as the security team we had hired, paid for by the restored trust, began the process of changing the locks. The matriarch was gone. The curator had finished the audit. The dust didn't just settle. 3 weeks after the locks were changed on the Charleston estate, the air in our new home, a quiet, sun-drenched cottage miles away from the humidity of Sarah's expectations, felt breathable for the first time. The resolution wasn't loud. It was a series of wire transfers and signatures. We didn't just take the estate, we liquidated it. Every piece of forged jewelry, every mahogany chair, and every drop of Sarah's legacy was sold to restore Emma's trust. After the legal fees and the forensic accountants were paid, the ledger finally balanced. Emma didn't just have her father's inheritance back. She had a future that wasn't being harvested by a parasite. The final severance is rarely a single moment. It's a process of realization. I sat on the porch watching Christopher and Emma play in the yard, and I realized that cutting a poisonous branch isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of forestry. If you don't prune the rot, the whole tree dies. Sarah had tried to use the concept of blood to keep us tethered to her dysfunction, but blood is just biology. Family is a choice made in the quiet moments, in the way Christopher looked at Emma, as if she were the center of his universe despite sharing 0% of her DNA. The final scene of our transformation didn't happen at a gala. It happened in a small wood-paneled courtroom. There were no projectors or designer watches. It was just us and a judge. "Do you understand the significance of this petition?" the judge asked, looking over his spectacles at Emma. "Yes, sir," Emma said, her voice steady. "I'm choosing my own name." When we walked out of that building, Emma wasn't a guest in the Charleston lineage anymore. She carried my maiden name, a name that in our house stands for curators, protectors, and truth-tellers. That night, for the first time in 7 years, I didn't dream of family trees or missing branches. I slept in the silence of a house where everyone belonged. We celebrated a quiet Christmas by the fire with small, thoughtful gifts and the knowledge that no one was keeping score. The ledger was closed, the audit was over, we were finally just a family. If you believe family is a choice and not a bloodline, hit share. Don't let anyone make your child feel like an outsider in their own home. Subscribe for more stories of justice.